In the park, I found my son, sitting on a bench with my grandson and their luggage. I asked him, "Why aren't you at work?" He looked up at me with eyes red from crying and said, "I got fired, Dad. My father-in-law kicked us out. He said our bloodline wasn't worthy of his legacy." I looked at the 3 broken suitcases containing their entire lives, and then I looked at my terrified grandson hugging a dirty teddy bear. I smiled and said, "Get in the car." It was time Preston Sterling found out that the bloodline he just insulted owns the bank that holds his mortgage. Before I tell you how I brought a fake billionaire to his knees, please hit that like button and subscribe. If you have ever been looked down upon by someone who thought they were better than you, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. I am Harrison Thorne, and for the last 10 years I have lived in a cabin in the woods, driving a rusted Ford F-150 and wearing flannel shirts that have seen better days. To the world, I am just a retired old man fishing my days away. My son Leo believes I survive on a small pension and the occasional fish I catch. He does not know that the lake I fish in belongs to me. He does not know that the forest surrounding it belongs to me. And he certainly does not know that Thorne Capital, the venture firm that just bought his father-in-law's debt, is my company. I raised Leo to be independent, to value hard work over inheritance. But today that lesson was going to change. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the water on the lake was glass. I was unhooking a small bass, ready to throw it back, when the silence was shattered. My phone buzzed against the tackle box. It was a burner phone I kept for emergencies, but the number flashing on the screen was not Leo. It was a local area code. I wiped the fish slime off my hand and answered. "Hello?" "Dad." The voice was cracked, broken. It sounded like a child who had just scraped his knee, not a 32-year-old lead software engineer. "Leo." I sat up straighter on my folding chair. "Is everything okay?" There was a long pause, filled with the sound of wind hitting a microphone and distant traffic. Then came the sound that no father ever wants to hear. The sound of his grown son trying to suppress a sob. "Dad, I am sorry. I did not know who else to call. Do you have space? Just for tonight? For Toby and me?" My heart hammered against my ribs. Leo was the pride of my life. He made 6 figures. He lived in a gated community, in a house I could have bought 100 times over, but let him buy himself so he could feel the pride of ownership. He had a wife, Brittany, who liked expensive wine and disliked my cabin. Why was he asking for space? "Where are you, Leo?" My voice dropped an octave. The fish flopped back into the water, forgotten. "Centennial Park, near the North Gate. Please, Dad, just for tonight?" I did not ask another question. I threw the tackle box into the bed of the truck and gunned the engine. My 1998 Ford roared to life, coughing a cloud of black smoke before tearing down the dirt road. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Leo was a good man. Too good. He had my work ethic, but he had his mother's soft heart. He married into the Sterling family 5 years ago, and I knew from the wedding day that they looked at him not as a partner, but as an accessory. Preston Sterling, the patriarch of that family, was a man who wore suits that cost more than my truck, but had eyes that looked cheap. The drive to the park took 20 minutes. I made it in 10. I pulled up to the curb, and the sight that greeted me made my blood run cold. It was not just that they were sitting on a park bench. It was the way they were sitting. Leo was hunched over, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. My grandson Toby was 6 years old. He was sitting next to his father, clutching a bear that had missing fur on one ear. But what tore me apart were the suitcases. There were 3 of them. Expensive hard-shell luggage. The kind that is supposed to be indestructible. But the zippers were busted. Clothes were spilling out of the side of one, like guts from a wound. A sleeve of one of Leo's dress shirts was dragging in the dirt. These bags had not been packed. They had been thrown. I killed the engine and stepped out. The slam of my truck door made Leo flinch. He looked up, and the shame in his eyes was almost physical. He stood up, wiping his face, trying to compose himself, trying to be the man he thought I wanted him to be. "Dad," he choked out. "Thanks for coming. I know it is a hassle." I walked right past him and knelt down in front of Toby. "Hey there, little man." I tried to keep my voice steady. "You ready for an adventure at Grandpa's cabin? We can roast marshmallows." Toby nodded, his eyes wide and fearful. "Grandpa, are we poor now?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I looked up at Leo. He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I stood up slowly. The bones in my knees popped, but I felt strong. Dangerous. "Leo, look at me." He finally turned his head. "What happened?" I asked. "And do not give me the sanitized version. I want the truth." Leo took a shuddering breath. "I went to work this morning. Preston called me into his office at 9. I thought we were going to discuss the new software rollout. I built that system, Dad. I spent 3 years coding it. It saved the company millions." I nodded. I knew his talent. He didn't even look up from his desk. He just slid a paper across the mahogany. "Termination notice, effective immediately." He said they were downsizing. Downsizing. I repeated the word. It tasted like bile. "You are the lead engineer. You don't downsize the engine of the car while you are driving it." "That is what I said." Leo ran a hand through his hair. I asked him why. I asked him about my severance, about my stock options. He just laughed. He pressed a button and security came in. 2 guys I have known for 5 years. They escorted me out like a criminal. They didn't even let me pack my personal items. They just walked me to the curb. My jaw tightened. This was not a business decision. This was a hit. "And Brittany?" I asked. "Where was your wife while her father was firing you?" Leo looked down at the broken suitcase. "When I got home, my key didn't work. The locks were already changed, Dad." It had only been an hour. They had a locksmith there before I even left the building. I banged on the door. I could hear them inside. He paused, and a fresh tear tracked through the dust on his cheek. Brittany opened the door. She didn't let me in. She just stood there blocking the way. She said she couldn't be with a failure. She said she needed security, and I couldn't provide it anymore. She chose her daddy's money over her husband. I said it as a statement of fact, not a question. Then Preston came to the door. Leo's voice trembled with a mix of rage and humiliation. He kicked these suitcases down the steps. He told Toby to go with his father because he didn't want him anymore. I felt a cold calm settle over me. It is a feeling I haven't had since my days in the boardroom during a hostile takeover. It is the feeling of knowing your enemy has made a fatal mistake. What exactly did he say, Leo? I need to know the exact words. Leo looked me in the eye, and for a second, I saw a spark of the anger he should have been feeling. He said, "Your bloodline is weak, Leo. It is a servant's bloodline. The Sterling family needs noble blood to survive. We have found someone better for Brittany. Someone worthy. Worthy. I looked at my son, a man who had never asked me for a dime, who worked 18-hour days to support a wife who spent money faster than he could earn it. I looked at my grandson, a boy who was treated like disposable trash because his last name wasn't Sterling. Preston Sterling thought he was royalty because he owned a mid-sized tech firm inherited from his father. He didn't know that true power doesn't scream, it whispers. He didn't know that the man standing in front of him in a stained fishing vest could buy his entire existence with a signature. I reached out and grabbed one of the broken suitcases. The handle was snapped, but I lifted it anyway. "Get in the truck," I said. Leo hesitated. "Dad, we can't impose." "I will find a motel. I just need to check my accounts. I think they froze the joint account, but I might have some cash." I grabbed him by the shoulder. My grip was iron. "You are not going to a motel. You are coming home. And as for your bloodline," I walked over to the truck and threw the suitcase in the back. It landed with a heavy thud next to my tackle box. I turned back to my son, and for the first time that day, I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf who just found the door to the sheep pen unlocked. We are going to show Preston Sterling exactly what this bloodline is capable of. Leo looked confused, but he nodded. He ushered Toby into the cab of the truck. As I climbed into the driver's seat, I looked back toward the city skyline. Somewhere in one of those glass towers, Preston Sterling was probably toasting to his victory. He was probably laughing about the poor engineer he had crushed. He had no idea that he had just declared war on the wrong man. I put the truck in gear. The engine roared, and as we pulled away from the curb, I reached into my pocket and touched the cold metal of my burner phone. I needed to make a call. Not to order pizza, but to wake up a ghost. My past was about to catch up with his present. Stay tuned, because what happened next involves a secret vault, a ruthless lawyer, and a dinner party that Preston Sterling will never forget. But first I need to know. Have you ever had family turn their back on you when you needed them most? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. The iron gates of the Sterling estate loomed ahead, like the entrance to a fortress built on ego and debt. Leo sat in the passenger seat of my 1998 Ford F-150, clutching the door handle, his knuckles white. I could see the security guard stepping out of his booth, waving his hand for us to stop. He looked like he was barely out of high school, wearing a uniform that was 2 sizes too big. I did not slow down. I rolled down the window, and the boy yelled that this was private property and Mr. Sterling was not accepting visitors. I looked at him and said, "Tell Preston that his past is here to collect." The guard reached for his radio, but I had already shifted into low gear. I did not ram the gate with speed that would be reckless. Instead, I nudged the heavy steel frame with the reinforced bumper of my truck. The metal groaned in protest. The lock snapped with a sound like a gunshot, and the gates swung open. Leo gasped, but said nothing. We rolled up the long, winding driveway, lined with manicured hedges that cost more than most people earn in a year. I parked my rusted, leaking truck right in the middle of the circular driveway, directly behind a silver Bentley. The contrast was deliberate. I wanted Preston to see the dirt. I wanted him to see the rust. I wanted him to underestimate me. The front door opened before I even killed the engine. Preston Sterling marched out, and he was not alone. He held a crystal wine glass in one hand and a half-smoked cigar in the other. Behind him stood a group of people holding cocktail plates. I recognized a few faces. A local councilman, a real estate developer. They were the kind of people who smiled with their teeth, but never with their eyes. Preston stopped at the top of the stairs, looking down at us like we were stray dogs that had wandered onto his porch. "Well, look who decided to crawl out of the woods," Preston announced, his voice booming so his guests could hear every word. "I thought you had finally died in that cabin, Harrison. I was waiting for the obituary so I could send flowers, or maybe a wreath made of weeds." The guests chuckled, a low, polite sound that made my skin crawl. Preston took a sip of his wine, his eyes scanning my faded fishing vest and the mud on my boots. "You know the service entrance is around back, where the trash is collected. That seems more your speed." I stepped out of the truck, and the sound of my heavy boots hitting the pavement echoed. I did not look at the guests. I looked straight at Preston. "I am here for my grandson's things, Preston. And I am here to remind you that throwing a child onto the street is a crime in this state." Leo got out from the other side. He looked small standing next to the truck, but he straightened his spine. "Preston, we need to talk about custody," Leo said, his voice shaking slightly but gaining strength. "You cannot just lock me out. We have joint assets. We have a life." Preston laughed, a bark of a sound that lacked any real humor. "Assets? You have nothing, Leo. You lived in a house I paid the down payment for. You drove a car leased in my company name. You were a pet we kept around because Brittany thought you were cute. But pets get old. And when they get old and useless, we put them outside." Then he reached into the inner pocket of his Italian suit. He pulled out a thick stack of bills wrapped in a blue bank band. He didn't hand it to Leo. He tossed it into the air. The $100 bills fluttered down like dead leaves, landing in the oil stain leaking from my truck and scattering across the dirty pavement near Leo's feet. "There is your severance package," Preston sneered. $5,000. That should buy you a nice tent and maybe a few months of that cheap beer your father drinks. Take it and disappear. Consider it a termination fee for the marriage." Leo stared at the money on the ground. His face was burning red, the humiliation radiating off him in waves. He looked up toward the house, searching. I followed his gaze. On the second-floor balcony, standing behind the railing, was Brittany. She was wearing a silk dress, holding a glass of champagne. She saw Leo looking at her. She saw the money in the dirt. For a second, I thought she might say something. I thought she might show a shred of the humanity Leo claimed she possessed. Instead, she turned her back and walked into the house, closing the glass door behind her. Leo made a sound like a wounded animal and moved to step forward, but I put a hand on his chest. "Stop," I said quietly. "Don't give him the satisfaction." Preston and his guests were laughing now, openly, pointing at the money. "Look at them," the councilman whispered loud enough for us to hear. "Probably the most cash they have seen in a decade." I bent down. The laughter grew louder. Preston grinned, looking down his nose at me. "That is right, Harrison. Bow down. Pick it up. It is probably more than your pension pays in a year." I reached for a bill that had landed near my boot. I picked it up. But I did not put it in my pocket. I held it up to the sunlight. The paper was crisp. Too crisp. It felt stiff between my fingers. I rubbed my thumb over the ink. I spent 40 years in finance. I know the feel of money that has been in circulation. And I know the feel of money that has just come off a press. But this was specific. I brought it closer to my nose. It had a faint chemical smell. Not the smell of cocaine and sweat that covers most American currency. It smelled of ozone and fresh polymer. I looked at the serial number. L4492001. I bent down and picked up another bill. L4492002. Sequential serial numbers. Uncirculated. And the blue strip was slightly off-center. This was not money from a withdrawal at a local Chase or Wells Fargo. This was Federal Reserve stock that usually went directly to international clearinghouses. This was offshore money. The kind you keep in a vault in the Caymans or Zurich and bring into the country in a private jet when your domestic accounts are frozen or monitored. A man who is downsizing his company because of budget cuts does not walk around with $5,000 in sequential offshore bills. A man who is broke uses credit. A man who is hiding assets uses cash. Preston Sterling was not just a cruel father-in-law. He was a man frantically trying to move liquidity before a crash. He was bleeding out, and this cash was his bandage. The laughter on the porch died down as they watched me. They expected me to stuff the money into my shirt. They expected me to scramble for the rest. Instead, I stacked the two bills neatly together. I stood up slowly, dusting off my knee. I walked up the stairs. The security guard stepped forward, but Preston waved him off, expecting me to beg or thank him. I stopped 2 steps below Preston. I looked him in the eye, and for the first time I saw a flicker of unease in his gaze. He saw that I was not looking at the money with greed. I was looking at it with analysis. "You kept this in a humidity-controlled safe, didn't you, Preston?" I said, my voice low and steady. "Zurich, or maybe Luxembourg. You didn't declare this at customs, did you?" Preston's smile faltered. "What are you talking about, you senile old fool?" I pulled the rest of the stack from his hand before he could react. I combined it with the bills I had picked up. I slapped the entire stack against his chest, hard enough to make him stumble back, spilling his wine onto his pristine shirt. "Keep it," I said, loud enough for the councilman and the developer to hear. "You are going to need it to buy sedatives, Preston. Because when the auditors see what I just saw, you are going to have a very hard time sleeping." I turned around and walked back to the truck. Leo was staring at me wide-eyed. I opened the door and climbed in. Preston was sputtering on the porch, wiping wine off his lap, shouting threats that we were trespassing. I put the truck in reverse and backed out, crushing the money he had thrown into the pavement with my muddy tires. As we drove away, Leo looked at me. "Dad, what was that about? Why did you say that about auditors?" I kept my eyes on the road. "Because your father-in-law is not just broke, Leo. He is a criminal. And I just found the first loose thread in his sweater. Now we are going to pull it until the whole thing unravels." I reached for my phone. It was time to call Rebecca again. I needed to know exactly which flight Preston Sterling had taken into the country last week, and what was in his luggage. The war had just begun, and I had just secured the first weapon. The silence in the cab of my truck was heavier than the humidity hanging over the Georgia pines. The only sound was the hum of tires on asphalt, and the occasional sniffle from the back seat, where Toby had finally fallen asleep, clutching his dirty bear. Leo stared out the window, watching the trees blur by, his reflection ghosting against the glass. I could see the turmoil in his eyes, the war between the reality he had just lived and the fantasy he was desperate to keep alive. Then his phone buzzed. It was a harsh vibration against the plastic dashboard where he had tossed it. Leo snatched it up like a starving man reaching for bread. The screen lit up his face in a pale blue glow, and I saw his expression shift from despair to a fragile, desperate hope. He read the message once, then twice. Then he slumped back against the seat, letting out a long breath that sounded almost like relief. "It is Brittany," he said softly. I kept my eyes on the road, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. What does she want, Leo? Does she want to know if her son has a bed to sleep in tonight? Leo shook his head, defending her reflexively. She says she had no choice, Dad. Listen to this. He held the phone up, reading the text aloud. Leo, I am so sorry. Please do not hate me. Dad says the company is on the brink of collapse. The investors are pulling out. He says this marriage to Julian is the only way to save the family legacy. I have to sacrifice my happiness for the greater good. Please do not blame Dad. He is just doing what he has to do to survive. I love you. Leo lowered the phone, pressing it against his chest. See, Dad? She is being forced. She is a victim in this too. Preston is manipulating her just like he manipulated me. I merged onto the dirt road that led to my property, fighting the urge to snatch the phone and throw it out the window. This was the lie. This was the poison. It is what abusers do. They paint themselves as victims of circumstance. They make you believe that their cruelty is actually a form of sacrifice. Leo, I said, my voice low and rough. Look at me. He turned his head slowly. A woman who loves her husband does not let her father throw his clothes in the dirt. A mother who loves her child does not stand on a balcony drinking champagne while her 6-year-old gets kicked out onto the street. But she is scared, Leo argued, his voice cracking. She has always been afraid of him. Fear does not make you cruel, Leo. Fear makes you protective. If she was scared, she would be in this truck with us. She is not scared. She is comfortable. She made a choice between a husband who works for a living and a lifestyle that requires millions. She chose the money. Leo looked back out the window, turning away from the truth. She is confused. Once I get back on my feet, once I show Preston I can make it on my own, she will come back. I said nothing. I let the silence return. You cannot wake a sleepwalker by shouting. He thought his failure had led him to a place of destitution. Dad, I am so sorry, he whispered, placing a suitcase on the floor. I did not realize things had gotten this bad for you. I walked over to the stove and started crumpling newspaper to build a fire. I am fine, Leo. I have everything I need. No, you don't, Leo said, his voice gaining a sudden determination. Look at this roof, Dad. I can see daylight through the beams. And that fridge sounds like it is dying. He walked over to me and put a hand on my shoulder. Listen, I will fix this. I know I lost my job, but I can find work. I will take anything. Construction, waiting tables. I will double shifts if I have to. We will get the roof fixed before winter, I promise. I looked at my son. He had just lost his career, his wife, and his home. He had $5,000 to his name and a child to feed. And yet his first instinct was to promise to fix my roof. This was the bloodline Preston Sterling called unworthy. This was the character he spat on. I felt a lump in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I could not tell him yet. If I told him I was a billionaire now, it would solve his financial problems, but it would not heal his spirit. He needed to fight back first. He needed to find his own strength. Don't worry about the roof, I said, striking a match and tossing it into the stove. Worry about getting... He had asked me to look over his resume earlier to see if I had any advice from my old days in middle management. He still thought I was just a retired mid-level manager. I opened the laptop. The screen flared to life, illuminating the scars on my hands. I did not open his resume. I opened his email client. I needed to know how deep the rot went. Preston Sterling was desperate, I knew that. But desperate men do desperate things, and I needed to know if Leo was just collateral damage or if he was a target. I started scrolling through his sent folder. Nothing unusual. Project updates, code commits, birthday emails to Brittany that went unanswered. Then I went to the trash folder. Most people think that when you hit delete, an email is gone. But Leo was an engineer. He had set up his archiving system to keep deleted items for 30 dozens of emails from the finance department. But they were not addressed to Leo. They were CC'd to a hidden distribution list that included Leo's administrative account. I clicked on one dated 3 days ago. Subject line: Project Phoenix allocation. I read the body of the email and my blood ran cold. It was a transfer authorization. $300,000, moving from a shell company in Nevada to an account in the Cayman Islands. The authorization signature at the bottom was digital. It was a code key. I recognized the format. But what made my heart stop was the user ID attached to the key. LT_dev_admin. Leo Thorne. I clicked on another email, the vague reason of downsizing, the rush to get him out of the house. Preston wasn't just clearing space for a new son-in-law. He was cutting ties with the patsy. When the IRS or the FBI eventually knocked on the door of Sterling Tech, Preston would point to the logs. He would say, "Look, it was the lead engineer. He had admin access. He moved the money. That is why I fired him when I found out." Leo wasn't just unemployed. He was walking around with a target on his back. If I hadn't... She slept less than I did. I texted her 3 words: freeze the assets. Then I sat back and watched the embers die. The text message from Brittany earlier echoed in my mind. Don't blame Dad. Oh, I didn't blame him. Blame implies a mistake. This was not a mistake. This was an execution. And tomorrow morning, the executioner was going to find... I stood up from the kitchen table, my joints popping in protest, but my mind was sharper than it had been in a decade. I walked quietly down the narrow hallway, past the room where my son and grandson slept. I paused at the door, listening to the soft sounds of Toby murmuring in his sleep. It was covered in a thin layer of dust, just like everything else in this cabin. A deliberate layer of neglect, designed to fool the casual observer. I gripped the frame. First was a satellite. She was my former general counsel, and the only person on earth who knew exactly how much I was worth. She ran the day-to-day operations of my private holdings from a glass office in Manhattan, while I played the role of the hermit. "Rebecca," I said, my voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "I need you to wake up the board." "Harrison." Her tone shifted instantly from professional to concerned. "We haven't had a voice protocol in 5 years. Is everything all right? Are you compromised?" I looked back toward the hallway where my son was sleeping on a lumpy mattress because he had nowhere else to go. "I am fine," I said, "but I need you to initiate Ghost Protocol. We are going hunting." There was a pause on the line, the sound of typing filling the silence. "Target," she asked. "Sterling Tech. Preston Sterling." I heard a sharp intake of breath. "The mid-cap tech firm in Atlanta. Harrison, that is a sinking ship.
Their financials are a disaster.
We have avoided them for 2 quarters because their debt-to-equity ratio is toxic. Why would you want to touch that radioactive waste? Because he made it personal, I said, letting the anger bleed into my voice for just a second. He fired Leo today. He kicked him and my grandson out on the street. He questioned the Thorne bloodline. The typing on the other end stopped abruptly. I see, she said. Her voice was now cold, deadly, efficient. If he touched family, then he is not a target, Harrison. He is a carcass. What are your orders? I want the debt, I said. All of it. I want every outstanding loan, every line of credit, every mortgage he holds. I don't care about the premium. Buy it all. I want to own the air he breathes by sunrise. Hold on, she said. The typing resumed faster this time, a manic staccato. I am pulling his detailed credit report and the dark pool data now. Give me 30 seconds. I waited, staring at the brass seal in the safe. I traced the lion's head with my thumb. Preston thought he was a lion. He was about to find out he was just a gazelle who had wandered into the tall grass. Okay, I have it, Rebecca said. It is worse than we thought, Harrison. Sterling Tech is underwater by $42 million. He has leveraged everything. The company accounts, the real estate, even his personal assets. But here is the kicker. He has a balloon payment due on Monday. That is 48 hours from now. If he misses it, the bank triggers a default clause. Who holds the note? I asked. A consortium of regional banks, she replied. They are nervous. They want out. If we offer to buy the debt at 90 cents on the dollar, they will bite our hands off just to clear the risk. Do it, I commanded. Offer them full face value if you have to. I don't want any delays. I want that paper in my name before the banks open on Monday. Done, she said. But Harrison, there is a complication. I am seeing a pending injection of capital. It looks like he is trying to secure a bridge loan from a private investor to cover the Monday payment. If he gets that money, he buys himself another 6 months. Who is the investor? Rebecca paused. It is Julian Vance. The name hit me like a physical blow. Julian Vance, the son of Senator Vance, a man known in the social pages for crashing Ferraris and dating models, but known in the financial world as a gambler who used his father's political connections to launder influence. He was a parasite. And he was the man Preston was trying to sell my daughter-in-law to. It fits, I said quietly. Preston is selling Brittany to Vance in exchange for the bridge loan. He is trading his daughter for a 6-month extension on his misery. We have to stop that loan, Rebecca said. If Vance transfers the funds, Preston survives. He won't transfer anything, I said, my grip tightening on the phone. Julian Vance is overleveraged too. He lives on credit and his father's name. If we cut off his liquidity, he cannot write a check for lunch, let alone for $42 million. Rebecca, I want you to call our contacts at the compliance office. Flag Vance's accounts for suspicious activity. Trigger a Patriot Act audit. Freeze him out. That is aggressive, Harrison. It could cause a political storm. Let it storm, I said. I want Preston Sterling to walk into that bank on Monday morning thinking he has a lifeline, only to find out I am holding the other end of the rope. Drown them both. Understood, Rebecca said. The debt will be yours by morning, and Vance will be locked out of his accounts before he wakes up. Welcome back to the game, Harrison. I hung up the phone and placed it back in the safe. I looked at the pistol one last time before swinging the heavy steel door shut.
The hiss of the air seal closing sounded like a guillotine dropping. I swung the map back into place, obscuring the vault and turning the room back into a dusty closet.
I turned around to leave, and my heart nearly stopped. Standing at the other end of the hallway, rubbing sleep from his eyes, was Leo. He was wearing his wrinkled t-shirt and boxer shorts, looking small and vulnerable in the shadows. He was staring right at me. "Dad," he asked, his voice groggy, "who are you talking to?" My mind raced. The walls of the cabin were thin. Had he heard me say 42 million? Had he heard me order a financial assassination? I walked toward him, keeping my face in the shadows until I could compose my expression. "I was just on the phone with the pizza place, Leo. I couldn't sleep. I thought maybe we could use some comfort food." "Pizza." Leo squinted at me, confused. "Dad, it is 3 a.m. No pizza place is open in these woods." I forced a chuckle, a sound that felt rusty in my throat. "You know me, son. I was leaving a voicemail for when they open. I wanted to make sure we had a pepperoni pie for lunch. You know how much Toby loves pepperoni." Leo stared at me for a long moment. I could see the gears turning in his head. He knew something was off. He knew his father didn't wake up at 3 a.m. to order lunch. But he was too tired, too broken to question it. He slumped against the doorframe, the adrenaline of the day finally draining out of him completely, leaving just a hollow shell. "Dad, I can't eat," he whispered. "I can't sleep. I keep thinking about what Preston said, about the bloodline. Maybe he is right. Look at me. I am 32, and I am sleeping in my father's spare room. I couldn't protect my wife. I couldn't keep my house. Maybe I am just weak." I closed the distance between us in 2 strides. I grabbed him by the shoulders hard enough to make him look up. "Listen to me, Leo. Weakness is not losing your job. Weakness is not losing your house. Weakness is sacrificing your family to save your ego. That is what Preston did. You are still standing here. You are still worrying about your son. That is strength." "But I have nothing," Dad, Leo said, tears welling up in his eyes again. "I have no leverage. I want to go back there and smash his face in. I want to burn that house down." "No," I said, sharp and commanding. "That is what a thug does, and you are not a thug. You are a thorn." I steered him back toward the bedroom, his body heavy with defeat. "We do not use our fists, Leo," I told him, guiding him to the mattress. "Violence is the tool of the incompetent. When someone takes something from you, you don't break their nose. You take what they value most. You take their foundation. You take the ground they stand on until they have no choice but to kneel." Leo looked at me from the mattress, pulling the thin blanket up. "What does Preston value most, Dad?" "He values his image," I said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "He values the lie that he is better than us. And tomorrow, we are going to take that lie and shatter it. Go to sleep, Leo. You need your rest. Because tomorrow, you are not going to look for a job. Tomorrow, we are going to go shopping." "Shopping?" Leo mumbled, his eyes already closing. "We don't have any money, Dad." I patted his leg. "Let me worry about the money. You just worry about looking the part." I watched him drift back to sleep. He didn't know that while he slept, he had just become the heir to an empire that owned his enemy's future. He didn't know that the pizza I ordered was actually a hostile takeover. I went back to the kitchen and sat in the dark, watching the sun slowly begin to bleed gray light through the trees. The birds were starting to sing, unaware of the predator sitting in the cabin. Preston Sterling thought he had won a battle. He didn't realize that he had just invited the war into his living room. And as the first ray of sunlight hit the dusty floorboards, I smiled. It was Monday tomorrow, and Monday was going to be a very bad day to be a Sterling. The morning sun was sharp and unforgiving as I steered my old truck toward the downtown district. Leo sat in the passenger seat, nervously adjusting the collar of the flannel shirt I had lent him. He looked out of place among the gleaming glass skyscrapers and the rush of suits heading to their high-rise offices. To him, we were driving into enemy territory, armed with nothing but a rusted vehicle and an empty bank account. He did not know that we were actually driving to the front lines of a war I had already won. I parked the truck 2 blocks away from the First National Bank, deliberately choosing a spot where the meter was broken. Leo looked at the bank's imposing marble facade and hesitated. "Dad, why are we coming to this branch? The fees here are astronomical. We should go to the credit union on the outskirts of town." I turned off the ignition and looked at him. "We are here, Leo, because this is where business is done. And today, we have business." I could see the fear in his eyes. It was the fear of a man who had been stripped of his identity. For years, Leo had walked into buildings like this with a platinum card and a title. Now he felt like an imposter. He felt like the poverty Preston Sterling had accused him of having was stamped on his forehead. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Listen to me. You walk in there with your head up. You are not a beggar. You are a customer. And never let anyone make you feel small in a room you have every right to be in." He nodded, swallowing hard, and we stepped out into the humid city air. The interior of the bank was cool and smelled of sanitized money and stale coffee. The ceilings were high, supported by faux Greek columns designed to intimidate people into trusting the institution with their life savings. It was quiet, the kind of hushed silence where a dropped pen sounds like a gunshot. We walked toward the teller line, but my eyes were not on the young woman counting cash behind the glass. My eyes were scanning the glass-walled offices to the right. And there he was, just as Rebecca had predicted, based on the intercepted calendar invite. Preston Sterling was sitting in the main loan officer's cubicle. He did not look like the arrogant king who had stood on his balcony yesterday. He looked like a man trying to hold back a landslide with a spoon. His tie was loosened slightly, and I could see a sheen of sweat on his forehead, despite the aggressive air conditioning. He was leaning forward, gesturing frantically at the loan officer, a young man who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Preston was desperate. The bridge loan he was counting on from Julian Vance hadn't materialized because I had frozen Vance's accounts hours ago. Now Preston was trying to secure emergency liquidity from a commercial bank using assets he no longer fully owned. I nudged Leo and pointed. "Look." Leo followed my gaze and his breath hitched. "Oh God, Dad, we have to go. He's going to see us." He turned to leave, his instinct to flee overpowering his pride. I grabbed his arm, holding him in place. "We are not going anywhere. Watch him, Leo. Look at his hands. Look at how he is tapping his foot. That is not a man in control. That is a man who is drowning." At that exact moment, Preston turned his head. His eyes widened when he saw us standing in the center of the lobby. For a second, I saw pure panic. He thought we knew. He thought we were there to expose him. But then his brain reset. He saw my faded jeans and Leo's borrowed work shirt, and the arrogance came rushing back like a tidal wave. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back against the wall. The noise drew the attention of every customer and teller in the bank. Preston marched out of the office, his face twisting into a sneer. "Well, I will be damned." Preston's voice echoed off the marble walls, loud and theatrical. "If it isn't the gutter rats! I didn't know they let vagrants into the First National. What are you doing here, Harrison? Did you come to cash a lottery ticket, or are you just here to steal the complimentary pens?" Leo shrank back, his face burning crimson. "Dad, please, let's just go." I stood my ground, planting my feet firmly on the polished floor. "We are just conducting business, Preston, same as you. Although from the looks of it, our business is going a lot smoother." Preston laughed, a harsh barking sound that made the security guard by the door look up. "Business? What business could you possibly have here? This is a bank for serious people, Harrison. We handle wealth management here, not welfare checks. And you, Leo," he turned his venom on my son, "I assume you are here to beg for a loan? Let me save you the credit check fee. You are worthless. You have no job, no home, and thanks to me, no references. You are radioactive." Leo looked at the floor, his hands balling into fists at his sides. He was shaking. The trauma of the eviction was still fresh, and Preston knew exactly where to press to make it hurt. Preston took a step closer, invading my personal space. His breath smelled of mints and fear. "I told you to disappear. But here you are, dragging your failure of a father around like a piece of luggage. It is pathetic." He looked around the lobby, performing for an audience of strangers. "Hey everyone, guard, get these two out of here. They are disturbing the peace. I am trying to close a multi-million-dollar deal, and the smell of poverty is distracting me." The security guard, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, started walking toward us, his hand resting on his belt. "Sir, I am going to have to ask you to lower your voices or leave." Leo grabbed my elbow. "Dad, please." I looked at Leo, and then I looked at Preston. I spoke calmly, but with enough projection that my voice cut through the air clearly. "Leo, look at him. Do you see a powerful man? Because I don't. I see a scared little man making a lot of noise." Preston's face turned purple. "Scared? I am Preston Sterling. I own this town." I smiled. "Dogs bark when they are cornered, Preston. And right now, you are barking very loud. You senile old fool," Preston shouted, pointing a trembling finger at my chest. "I am going to have you arrested. I am going to have you thrown in a cell so deep they will have to pump air down to you. Manager, where is the branch manager? I want these squatters removed immediately." The door to the main executive office at the back of the bank opened. Mr. Henderson, the branch manager, stepped out. He was a tall man with silver hair and a suit that cost more than Preston's car. He adjusted his glasses and surveyed the scene. Preston immediately straightened his jacket, wiping the sweat from his upper lip and putting on his best, charming smile. "Ah, Mr. Henderson," Preston said, stepping forward with his hand extended. "I am so sorry for the disturbance. I was just dealing with some riffraff that wandered in off the street. If you could just have security remove them, we can get back to discussing that line of credit. I am sure we can clear up the misunderstanding about my collateral." Preston stood there, hand out, waiting for the handshake that would validate his status. He expected Henderson to side with the man in the suit. He expected the system to protect its own. Mr. Henderson walked across the lobby, his polished shoes clicking rhythmically. He walked straight toward Preston. Preston beamed, ready to be ushered into the private office. And then Mr. Henderson walked right past him. He didn't even break stride. He breezed past Preston's outstretched hand, as if the man was invisible. Preston blinked, confused, turning around just in time to see Mr. Henderson stop directly in front of me. The manager didn't bow, but the way he inclined his head was a gesture of profound respect. "Good morning, sir," Henderson said, his voice low and deferential. "I apologize for the noise. We try to maintain a professional atmosphere here." I nodded slightly. "No apology necessary, Robert. Just a minor annoyance." Leo stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He looked from the manager to me, trying to understand why the head of the bank was treating a fisherman in a flannel shirt like royalty. Preston spluttered. "Robert, you know this man. He is a nobody. He is a retired mechanic or something." "Mr. Henderson, I insist you focus on my application. I have a deadline." Mr. Henderson turned slowly to face Preston. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by the cold steel of a banker delivering bad news. "Mr. Sterling," Henderson said, his voice icy, "I was actually coming out to deliver the decision on your loan application, personally." Preston puffed out his chest. "Finally. Well, let's go sign the papers. I assume everything is in order?" Mr. Henderson did not move. "Your application has been denied, Mr. Sterling." The silence that followed was absolute. The background noise of the bank seemed to vanish. Denied. Preston whispered the word like it was a foreign language. "That is impossible. I have assets. I have the factory. I have the estate." Mr. Henderson clasped his hands behind his back. "Actually, you don't. Our risk assessment team has flagged your collateral as highly distressed. Furthermore, we have received notice that your primary debt holder has sold your note. You are no longer dealing with the consortium, Mr. Sterling." Sold. Preston looked like he had been punched in the gut. "Who bought it? Who holds my debt?" Mr. Henderson paused, and for a split second his eyes darted to me. It was a micro-movement so fast that if you weren't looking for it, you would miss it. But I saw it, and Leo saw it. "That information is confidential pending the official transfer," Henderson said smoothly. "However, the new creditor has issued strict instructions. There will be no extensions, no bridge loans, and no refinancing. You have until 12 o'clock noon tomorrow to settle the outstanding balance of $42 million. If the funds are not wired by then, foreclosure proceedings on your business and your personal residence will begin immediately." Preston staggered back, clutching the edge of a desk for support. "Tomorrow? That is insane. I need a week. I just need a week to liquidate some stocks." "You have 24 hours, Henderson said with finality. "I suggest you spend less time shouting in my lobby and more time finding a miracle. Good day, Mr. Sterling." Henderson turned back to me and gave one last imperceptible nod before walking back to his office, closing the heavy oak door with a click. Preston stood there alone in the middle of the lobby. He looked small. The suit that looked expensive 10 minutes ago now looked like a costume. He looked around, but the tellers had gone back to work, the customers had looked away, and the security guard had stepped back. He was isolated. I looked at Leo. My son's back was straight now. He wasn't cowering. He was looking at his father-in-law with a mixture of shock and pity. "Come on, Leo," I said quietly. "We have what we came for." We turned and walked toward the glass doors. As we passed Preston, he didn't even look up. He was staring at the marble floor, muttering to himself, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Once we were outside, the heat of the city hit us, but it felt different now. It felt like cleansing fire. We walked to the truck in silence. Leo waited until we were inside and the doors were shut before he spoke. "Dad?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Why did the manager look at you like that? Like he knew you?" I started the engine, the old Ford rumbling to life. "I have banked here a long time, Leo. You get to know people." Leo shook his head. "No, that wasn't a 'I know you' look. That was a 'I work for you' look. Dad, what is going on? And how did you know Preston would be denied?" I pulled out into traffic, merging seamlessly into the flow of cars. "I told you, Leo, dogs bark when they are cornered, and I happen to know who built the cage." I didn't say anything else. I couldn't tell him yet. Not until tonight. Not until he walked into that gala wearing a $15,000 suit and realized that he wasn't just a guest. He was the executioner. We drove back toward the cabin, leaving the city behind. But as we drove, I could feel Leo watching me. The blind trust was gone, replaced by a burning curiosity. He was starting to see the cracks in my disguise. And tonight, at the auction, I would finally tear the mask off completely. Preston Sterling had 24 hours left. I intended to make every single minute feel like a lifetime. We sat in the cab of the truck parked on the side of Main Street, under the shade of an old oak tree. The air conditioning in my Ford had died 5 years ago, so the windows were rolled down, letting in the sounds of the city and the humid mid-morning heat. We had left the bank 20 minutes ago, but neither of us had spoken a word since. Leo was staring out the window, his eyes unfocused, lost in the memory of the bank manager bowing to his father. He was trying to reconcile the image of the man who fixed his own plumbing with the man who commanded the respect of Wall Street bankers. I let him think. Some truths are too big to swallow in one bite. You have to nibble at them until they are gone. I pulled the truck into a spot across from a high-end shopping strip. It was the kind of place where they did not put price tags in the window, because if you had to ask, you could not afford it. I knew this area well. I owned the land these shops sat on, though the tenants paid rent to a holding company with a meaningless name. I turned off the engine and leaned back against the worn fabric of the seat. "Why are we stopping, Dad?" Leo asked, his voice sounding tired. "We should get back to Toby." I did not answer immediately. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a thermos of black coffee. Pouring a cup for myself, I took a slow sip, letting the bitterness wake up my senses. "Drink some water, Leo," I said, passing him a bottle. "You are dehydrated. And we are not going back yet, because the lesson is not finished." Leo sighed, taking the water. "What lesson?" "That Preston is a crook. I get it, Dad. I saw it. He is broke and he is desperate. But that does not change the fact that he still has Brittany. He still has my wife. And she thinks she is saving him. I need to call her, Dad. I need to tell her that her father is lying to her about the company. If she knows the truth, she will leave him. She will come back to me." I looked at my son, and I felt a pang of sorrow so sharp it almost hurt. He was still clinging to the lie. He was still holding on to the fantasy that his wife was a damsel in distress locked in a tower by an evil dragon. He did not realize that she was not the prisoner. She was the dragon's apprentice. "Look across the street, Leo," I said, pointing with my chin. "Tell me what you see." Leo squinted against the glare of the sun. He looked at the row of shops, a boutique clothing store, a French bakery, and right in the center, a jewelry store with velvet ropes outside the door. "It is just a jewelry store, Dad," Leo said dismissively. "What about it?" "Look closer," I said, Look at the car parked in the loading zone directly in front. The white Mercedes convertible. Leo's eyes widened. He sat up straight, leaning halfway out the window. That is Brittany's car. I bought her that car for our 3rd anniversary. I paid the lease on it for 2 years. What is she doing here? His hand went to the door handle. She must be selling her jewelry. Oh God, Dad! She is selling her things to help her father pay the debt. She is sacrificing her own diamonds to save the family. I have to go to her. I have to stop her. He pushed the door open, ready to sprint across 4 lanes of traffic to save the woman who had locked him out of his own home. Stay right where you are, I commanded. My voice was not a shout, but it carried the weight of an order that could not be disobeyed. Leo froze, 1 foot on the pavement. Dad, she needs me. She does not need you, I said, grabbing his arm and pulling him back into the cab. Close the door, Leo, and watch. Just watch. Leo slammed the door shut, his chest heaving. You were wrong about her, Dad. You have always been wrong about her. She is not like Preston. She has a good heart. She is probably in there crying right now, handing over her wedding ring to keep the lights on at her father's house. I said nothing. I just pointed at the glass double doors of the jewelry store. A moment later, the doors opened. A security guard in a black suit stepped out holding the door open. And then Brittany stepped out. She was not crying. She was not wearing the sweatpants of a woman in distress. She was wearing a white sundress that showed off her tan, and oversized sunglasses that cost more than my truck. She looked radiant. She looked like a woman who had just won the lottery. And she was not alone. Walking beside her, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back, was Julian Vance. I knew Julian from his dossier. He was 35 years old, the son of a senator and a man who had never worked a day in his life. He wore a linen suit that was tailored to hide his soft middle, and his hair was slicked back with enough product to grease a skillet. He was smiling, a predatory smile that showed too many teeth. Leo made a sound in his throat, a strangled whimper that was painful to hear. No, that is not. Maybe he is just a friend. Maybe he is helping her sell the jewelry.
Then they stopped on the sidewalk.
Julian said something that made Brittany laugh. It was not a polite laugh. It was a genuine, head-thrown-back laugh of delight. She reached up and touched his chest, her fingers trailing down the lapel of his jacket. Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black velvet box. Leo stopped breathing. The air in the truck seemed to vanish. Julian opened the box. Even from across the street, I could see the flash of the stone. It was a diamond, a massive, gaudy rock that caught the sunlight and scattered it in a dozen directions. It was an engagement ring. Brittany did not hesitate. She did not look guilty. She did not look conflicted. She squealed a sound we could hear even over the traffic. She held out her hand, and Julian slid the ring onto her finger. It replaced the simple, tasteful band Leo had given her 5 years ago. Then she threw her arms around his neck. Julian spun her around and they kissed. It was not a peck on the cheek. It was a passionate, claiming kiss, right there on the sidewalk, in full view of the world. Leo watched in silence. He watched as his wife, the woman who texted him hours ago saying she was heartbroken, the woman who claimed she was sacrificing herself for the family, kissed another man with a passion she had never shown him. She wasn't selling jewelry, Leo, I said softly. She was upgrading. The couple broke the kiss. Julian whispered something in her ear, and Brittany giggled, leaning her head on his shoulder. They walked toward the white Mercedes. Julian opened the door for her, and she slid into the driver's seat. He walked around to the passenger side, and they drove off, the engine purring as they sped away toward the country club. We sat in the truck for a long time. The spot where the white car had been was now empty, but the image was burned into Leo's retinas. Leo did not move. He stared at the empty parking spot. I watched his face. I expected tears. I expected him to break down, to punch the dashboard, to scream. That is what a broken man does. But Leo did not scream. Slowly, the expression on his face began to change. The sadness evaporated. The confusion cleared. The desperate hope that had been animating him for the last 24 hours died a quiet death. In its place, something else began to form. His jaw set. The muscles in his neck tightened. His eyes, which had been soft and pleading, turned hard. They turned cold. It was the look of a man who finally understands that the world is not a fair place, and that being good is not enough to protect you from evil. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. He looked down at his hands. He was still wearing the cheap wedding band he had bought when he was just a junior developer. He twisted it. Once. Twice. Then he pulled it off. He held the ring in his palm for a second, feeling the weight of 5 years of lies. Then he opened the window and dropped it onto the asphalt. It didn't even make a sound when it hit the ground. He turned to me. His voice was different now. It was deeper, steadier. It sounded like my voice. She knew, he said. It wasn't the question. She knew, I confirmed. She knew about the money laundering. She knew about the setup. And she knew about Julian. This wasn't a sudden decision, Leo. You don't get a ring like that fitted in a day. They have been planning this for months. While you were working late to fix her father's code, she was with him. Leo nodded slowly, absorbing the poison, letting it fuel him instead of killing him. She looked at me yesterday, Dad, when I was standing in the driveway with my clothes in the dirt. She looked at me and she turned her back. I thought she was ashamed, but she wasn't, was she? No, I said. She was bored. Leo closed his eyes for a second, and when he opened them, the last trace of the boy I raised was gone. The man sitting next to me was new. He was forged in fire. He looked at the empty street, and then he looked at me. There was no fear in his eyes anymore, only a terrifying clarity. Dad, he said. Yes, son. How do we kill them? He didn't mean physically. I knew that. He meant something far more permanent. He meant, how do we take their world apart, brick by brick? How do we strip them of the very things they sold their souls to keep? I smiled. It was a genuine smile this time. A smile of pride. Because finally, my son was ready. He wasn't fighting for a lost love anymore. He was fighting for justice. That, I said, starting the engine, is the question I have been waiting for you to ask for 24 hours. I put the truck in gear and pulled out onto the road. The tires rolled over the gold wedding band, pressing it into the hot tar, burying it forever. We're going to go get you a suit, I said. And then, we are going to teach the Sterling family that you should never judge a bloodline until you see it bleed. Leo looked straight ahead. Let's go shopping, he said. We drove toward the city center, toward the tailor shop that served kings and presidents. The heartbreak was over. The mourning period was finished. Now it was time for the hunt. And tonight, when Leo walked into that ballroom, he wouldn't be walking in as a victim. He would be walking in as the storm that was coming to wash them all away. We drove away from the shopping district, leaving the memory of Brittany and her new diamond in the rearview mirror. Leo was silent, his hands resting on his knees, but the tension in his shoulders had changed. It was no longer the tension of a victim waiting for the next blow. It was the tension of a coiled spring waiting to snap. I navigated the truck through the city, avoiding the main avenues and turning into the garment district. This was the old part of town, where the buildings were brick and the streets were cobblestone. We pulled into a narrow alleyway wedged between two warehouses. Steam rose from a vent in the ground, and a stray cat watched us from a dumpster. Leo looked out the window, skeptical. "Dad, where are we going? This does not look like a place to buy a suit. This looks like a place to buy stolen car parts." I parked the truck and killed the engine. Trust me, Leo. Real luxury does not scream for attention from a billboard. It whispers behind closed doors. We got out and walked to a heavy oak door set into the brick wall. There was no sign, no handle, just a small brass buzzer. I pressed it once. A moment later, a slot in the door slid open and a pair of dark eyes peered out. The eyes widened in recognition, and the door swung open immediately. An elderly man with silver hair and a measuring tape draped around his neck stood there. He was wearing a vest that looked like it had been stitched by angels. He looked at me, and then he bowed low, a gesture of such profound respect that Leo stepped back in surprise. "Signore Thorne," the man said, his voice thick with an Italian accent. "It has been too long. We feared you had forgotten us." I stepped inside, the smell of expensive wool and cedar surrounding us. "I have been fishing, Giovanni, but today I need to catch a shark. And for that, my son needs to look dangerous." Leo walked in, looking around the shop in awe. It was like stepping into a different century. There were no racks of clothes, just rolls of fabric stacked against the wall, and a large three-way mirror in the center of the room. Giovanni looked at Leo, assessing him with a practiced eye. "He looks like you, Harrison. 40 years ago. Same shoulders, same inseam. I have just the thing. It was cut for a diplomat who failed to pay. I think it will fit him perfectly." Giovanni disappeared into the back room. Leo turned to me, his brow furrowed. "Dad, who is that guy? He acted like you were the president. You told me you used to manage a supply chain."
Since when do supply chain managers have private tailors in hidden alleys?
I kept my face neutral. "I did a lot of business in Europe back in the day, Leo. Giovanni and I go way back. We helped each other out of a tight spot in Milan once. Just think of him as an old war buddy." It was a half-truth. I had helped Giovanni, but not in a war. I had saved his family business from bankruptcy when a conglomerate tried to bulldoze his block. Loyalty is a currency that never devaluates. Giovanni returned carrying a suit bag. He unzipped it, and the fabric seemed to absorb the light. It was a midnight blue three-piece suit made of vicuña wool, the kind of fabric that costs more per yard than most people make in a month. "Try it on," I told Leo. Leo took the suit into the changing room. I waited quietly, sipping the espresso Giovanni had placed in my hand. When Leo stepped out, the transformation was physical. He stood in front of the mirror, and for a moment he didn't recognize himself. The suit didn't just fit him, it sculpted him. It broadened his shoulders and trimmed his waist. It made him look tall, imposing, and substantial. He wasn't the guy who got fired yesterday. He looked like the guy who did the firing. I walked up behind him, meeting his eyes in the reflection. I reached out and adjusted the knot of his silk tie, tightening it just enough to be perfect.
You look at yourself, and you wonder who this man is, I said softly. Leo nodded. I look like a fraud, Dad. I look like I am playing dress-up. No, I said, my voice firm. The fraud was the man Preston kicked out of his house. That man was weak because he believed he was small. He believed he needed permission to exist. That man died on a park bench yesterday. I smoothed the lapels of the jacket. The man in this mirror is the new Leo. This suit is not a costume, Leo. It is armor. When you walk into a room wearing this, you are telling the world that you are not asking for a seat at the table. You are owning the table. Leo took a deep breath, his chest expanding against the crisp white shirt. He squared his jaw. He looked at his reflection, and for the first time in 2 days, the shame was gone. In its place was a cold resolve. I am ready, Dad, he said. We thanked Giovanni, who refused to take a payment until I insisted, leaving a stack of cash on the counter that made Leo's eyes widen. We walked back out to the truck, the contrast between the Italian suit and the rusted Ford jarring. As we sat in the cab, I reached into my pocket. It was time for the final piece of the puzzle, the weapon. I pulled out a card. It wasn't plastic. It was made of anodized titanium. It was heavy, cool to the touch, and black as night. In the center was the image of a centurion. There was no limit on this card. It could buy a fleet of cars or a small island with a single swipe. I held it out to Leo. Leo looked at it. He hesitated before taking it. Dad, is this a black card? It is, I said, but how? Leo looked from the card to me, his mind racing, trying to connect the dots. You live in a cabin. You drive this truck. This card is invitation only. You have to spend millions just to qualify. I stared straight ahead through the cracked windshield. I told you, Leo. I saved for a rainy day. Well, it is pouring. I turned to face him. Tonight, Preston Sterling is hosting a charity gala at the Grand Hotel. He calls it a fundraiser, but we know what it really is. It is a desperate attempt to swindle investors into giving him cash to cover his debt before tomorrow's deadline. He is going to be selling everything he has left. Article heirlooms. And he is going to be parading Brittany and Julian around like a trophy couple to prove his stability. Leo's hand closed around the black card. The metal warmed against his skin. We are going to that party, I continued. We are going to walk in the front door, and we are going to buy every single lie he tries to sell. Leo looked down at the card again. He ran his thumb over the name embossed on the front. Harrison Thorne. He finally understood that the name meant something more than just his father. It meant power. So we aren't just crashing the party. Leo asked, a small, dangerous smile playing on his lips. No. I started the engine, the truck rumbling beneath us. We are not crashing it. We are foreclosing on it. Leo put the card in the inside pocket of his new suit, right next to his heart. He looked out the window as we pulled out of the alley. He didn't look like a passenger anymore. He looked like a general on his way to the front lines. Let's go, Dad, he said. I have some shopping to do. We drove toward the Grand Hotel as the sun began to dip below the skyline, painting the city in shades of blood orange and purple. The stage was set. The players were in position. And Preston Sterling had no idea that the 2 men he had discarded were coming to dinner. And they were bringing a very big appetite. The Grand Hotel lived up to its name that night. glowing like a beacon of excess against the velvet darkness of the city skyline. A red carpet had been rolled out, stretching from the curb to the revolving brass doors, flanked by velvet ropes and photographers who were paid to make the guests feel important. I watched the scene from the tinted window of a black stretch limousine that Rebecca had chartered for the evening. It was a long way from the rusted Ford truck we had been driving all day, and the silence inside the cabin was thick with anticipation. Leo sat across from me, adjusting his cufflinks for the 10th time. The midnight blue suit we had bought earlier absorbed the streetlights, making him look sharper, more defined. He did not look like my son, the soft-hearted engineer, anymore. He looked like a man who had buried his past and was on his way to the funeral. We watched as the guests arrived, women in gowns that cost more than a year of college tuition, and men in tuxedos who laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. And there at the top of the stairs stood the welcoming committee. Preston Sterling was in his element, or at least he was pretending to be. He was wearing a tuxedo with a white rose in his lapel, shaking hands and patting backs, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch. Beside him stood Brittany and Julian. They were posing for photos, a perfect picture of young love, manufactured for a desperate purpose. Brittany was wearing the diamond Julian had bought her that morning, and she was smiling the same practiced smile she used to give me when I visited for Christmas. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I tapped on the glass partition, and the driver nodded. The limousine pulled up to the curb, gliding silently into the space reserved for VIPs. The photographers turned their lenses toward us, expecting a celebrity or a senator. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door. I stepped out first, the flashbulbs blinding me for a second. Then Leo stepped out. I saw the exact moment Preston saw us. He was in the middle of laughing at something a donor said, but the laugh died in his throat. His eyes bulged. He blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear a hallucination. He recognized me, even in my tuxedo, but it took him a second longer to recognize Leo. When he did, his face went from shock to a shade of red that clashed with the red carpet. He excused himself from his guests and practically ran down the stairs, abandoning all decorum. He signaled frantically to the head of security, a large man with an earpiece who was standing by the door. Preston reached us before we could even step onto the carpet. He planted himself in front of us, blocking our path, his chest heaving. "Security, get over here immediately. I want these two removed from the premises." The photographers lowered their cameras, sensing a scandal. The guests nearby stopped talking. Preston didn't care. His desperation had made him sloppy. He looked at me with pure venom. "What do you think you are doing here, Harrison? This is a private black-tie gala, not a soup kitchen. And you," he turned to Leo, his eyes raking over the Italian suit with confusion. "Did you rent a costume, Leo? Trying to play pretend for one last night before you go back to the gutter?" Leo didn't flinch. He didn't look down. He stood a full inch taller than Preston, and for the first time, he used that height. "We are here for the auction, Preston," Leo said, his voice calm and level. Preston laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "The auction? You are here to bid with what? Food stamps? Security, get them out of my sight. They are trespassing." The security guard stepped forward, reaching for Leo's arm. "Sir, I am going to have to ask you to leave. This event is by invitation only." Preston grinned, triumphant. "Go on. Drag them out. Throw them in the street where they belong." I watched Leo. This was the test. Yesterday he would have apologized and walked away. Yesterday he would have let the shame consume him. But the man in the vicuña suit didn't move. He didn't pull away from the guard. He simply reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Preston flinched, thinking he was reaching for a weapon. But Leo pulled out a heavy, cream-colored envelope with gold edges. He didn't hand it to the guard. He didn't hand it to Preston. He held it up so the light from the chandeliers caught the gold embossing. "We have an invitation," Leo said. Preston snatched the envelope from Leo's hand, ripping it open. "That is impossible. I approved the guest list personally. If you forge this, I will have you arrested for fraud." He pulled out the card. It was not a standard paper invite. It was a rigid, heavy card plated in gold leaf. It was the kind of invitation sent only to the top 5 potential donors, the whales that the charity organizers hoped would save the night. Preston looked at the name engraved on the card. Thorne Capital and Associates. His hands started to shake. He looked up at Leo and then at me. "Thorne Capital. You stole this. You must have stolen this from someone's mailbox. You are thieves!" Preston was shouting now, losing control completely. He turned to the security guard, waving the card. "Arrest them! They stole this invitation. Thorne Capital is a billion-dollar hedge fund. These two are unemployed losers. This is theft." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and ugly. The crowd was whispering. The cameras were clicking again, capturing the meltdown of the host. The security guard looked unsure. He looked at the expensive invitation, and then at the expensive suit Leo was wearing, and then at the raving man in the tuxedo. He didn't know who to believe. That is when the hotel manager stepped out from the shadows of the entrance. He was the same man who had greeted us at the bank earlier that morning. He had been alerted by the commotion. He walked down the stairs with the grace of a diplomat and the authority of a judge. "Is there a problem, Mr. Sterling?" the manager asked, his voice cutting through the noise. Preston pointed a trembling finger at us. "Yes, there is a problem. These two imposters have stolen an invitation intended for a VIP guest. I want the police called." The manager turned to us. He looked at me and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. Then he took the invitation from Preston's hand. He examined it for less than a second. "Mr. Sterling," the manager said coolly, "this invitation is valid. It was issued directly from the charity's board of directors this morning to Mr. Harrison Thorne and his associate." Preston looked like he had been slapped. "What? That is a lie. Who is Harrison Thorne?" I stepped forward then. "I am Harrison Thorne," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of a sledgehammer. "And this is my son, Leo Thorne. We represent the capital that is going to save your auction tonight. Unless, of course, you don't want our money." Preston opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was trapped. If he kicked us out, he would be kicking out the biggest potential donor of the night in front of the press and the hotel management. He would look insane. He had to swallow his pride. He had to let the wolf into the fold, because he was too desperate to check the teeth. "Let them in," the manager said to the security guard, "and apologize to the gentleman." The guard stepped back, muttering an apology. Preston stood there, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. He still didn't understand. He couldn't connect the fisherman in the cabin to the name on the card. His brain refused to accept that the man he despised was the man he needed. Leo stepped past him. He didn't look at Preston. He walked right up the stairs toward the entrance. I followed him. As we reached the top of the stairs, we came face to face with Brittany and Julian. They had watched the entire scene from the doorway. Brittany was staring at Leo. Her mouth was slightly open. She looked at the suit, the way it fit him, the way he held himself. She looked at his face, which was no longer soft with adoration, but hard with indifference. Leo stopped in front of her. The smell of her perfume, the same perfume she wore on their wedding day, drifted through the air. Julian stepped forward instinctively, putting a protective hand on her arm, puffing out his chest to assert dominance. Leo didn't even look at Julian. He looked at Brittany. His eyes drifted down to the massive diamond on her finger and then back up to her eyes. "Hello, Brittany," Leo said. "You look expensive tonight." It wasn't a compliment. It was an observation. Brittany flinched. "Leo, what are you doing here?" "We are here to buy something," Leo said. "I hear there is a fire sale on the Sterling family legacy." Julian stepped in his face, twisting into a sneer. "Listen here, you loser. I don't know who you robbed to get that suit, but you don't belong here. Why don't you turn around before you embarrass yourself?" Leo finally looked at Julian. He looked at him with the amusement of a predator watching a buzzing fly. "I wouldn't worry about embarrassment," Julian, Leo said. "I would worry about your credit score. I heard it took a hit this morning." Julian froze. He had been trying to access his accounts all day and had been declined. He thought it was a bank error. The realization that Leo knew about it hit him hard. Leo smiled, a cold, shark-like smile. "Shall we go inside, Dad? I think the auction is about to start." We walked past them, entering the grand ballroom. The air inside was cool and smelled of lilies and money. Behind us, I could hear Preston shouting at the manager and Brittany asking Julian what Leo meant. The confusion was setting in. The panic was taking root. We found our table right at the front. It was the table reserved for Thorne Capital. We sat down and I watched my son pour himself a glass of water. His hand was steady. "You did good," I said. Leo took a sip. "I didn't feel good, Dad. I felt angry. But it was a useful anger." "Hold on to it," I said, "because the show is just beginning." On the stage, the auctioneer was taking his place. The first items were being brought out. Preston Sterling walked onto the stage a few minutes later. He looked shaken, but he plastered that fake smile back onto his face. He grabbed the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, his voice trembling slightly. "Welcome to a night of giving. Tonight we are not just raising money. We are securing the future." I leaned over to Leo. "He is right," I whispered. "He just doesn't know whose future he is securing." Leo stared at Preston, his eyes locking on to the man who had called him unworthy. "Let's buy it all, Dad," Leo whispered back. "Let's leave him with nothing." I sat back and crossed my legs. The paddle with our bidder number sat on the table. Number 1. It was time to go to work. The ballroom lights dimmed, focusing a single spotlight on the velvet-draped easel at the center of the stage. The murmurs of the crowd died down, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. I sat back in my chair, watching Preston Sterling wipe a bead of sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief. He looked like a man standing on the gallows, trying to sell the rope to the executioner. He stepped up to the microphone, tapping it twice. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice trembling with a mixture of pride and terror. "We have come to the final item of the evening. This is not just a piece of art. It is the heart of the Sterling family." He gestured to the assistants who pulled back the velvet cloth. Beneath it was an oil painting from the 19th century, depicting the founding patriarch of the Sterling line, standing in front of a factory. It was a moody, dark piece that screamed old money. I knew for a fact that Preston hated this painting. He used to complain that the eyes followed him around the room. But tonight he looked at it with the desperate affection of a man looking at a lifeboat. "This heirloom has been in my family for 4 generations," Preston continued. "It represents our resilience, our industry. I am offering it tonight not because I want to part with it, but because the cause we support is greater than any possession. The starting bid is $50,000. I looked over at Julian Vance, sitting at the table to our right. He was checking his phone, looking agitated. But when Preston announced the price, Julian straightened up. This was the plan. I could read it as clearly as a balance sheet.
Julian was supposed to buy the painting for an inflated price, injecting tax-free cash directly into Preston's foundation, which Preston would then raid to pay the bank. It was money laundering wrapped in a tuxedo. The auctioneer, a fast-talking man with a gavel that looked like a weapon, took the podium. "Do I hear 50,000? Julian raised his paddle instantly. 50,000. The room applauded politely. Preston exhaled a breath he had been holding. "Do I hear 60? The auctioneer asked, scanning the room. Julian raised his paddle again, bypassing the increment. 100,000, he shouted. A gasp rippled through the crowd. This was theater. Bad theater. Julian was driving up the price to make the donation look generous and to cover the full amount Preston needed. Preston beamed, clapping his hands together. A magnificent gesture from Mr. Vance. Truly a noble heart. The auctioneer was caught up in the energy. We have 100,000. Do I hear 110? 200,000. Julian announced, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. He looked over at Leo and winked. It was a gesture of pure arrogance. He was telling my son that he had the money to buy the family history that Leo had been kicked out of. Preston looked like he wanted to cry with relief. $200,000 would cover the immediate interest payments. It would buy him a week. Going once, the auctioneer chanted. Going twice. I nudged Leo's foot under the table. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Julian. He simply reached out and picked up paddle number 1. He raised it into the air without a word. The auctioneer paused his gavel, hovering inches from the block. We have a new bidder. Paddle number 1. Sir, what is your bid? Leo cleared his throat. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a razor blade. $500,000. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens when a bomb drops, but hasn't exploded yet. Every head in the room turned toward our table. Julian's smirk fell off his face like it had been slapped away. Brittany, who was sipping champagne, choked on her drink. But it was Preston's reaction that shattered the decorum. He didn't look happy. He didn't look grateful. He looked furious. He marched to the edge of the stage, pointing a shaking finger at Leo. Stop! Stop this immediately! This is a fraud! The auctioneer looked confused. Mr. Sterling, excuse me. He has no money, Preston screamed, his voice cracking. That man is my former son-in-law. I fired him yesterday. He is destitute. He is living in a shack in the woods. He is trying to sabotage my auction with fake bids. Throw him out. The crowd began to murmur. People were standing up, craning their necks to see the imposters. Security guards started moving toward our table. Preston was red in the face, veins bulging in his neck. He is a nobody. He couldn't buy a sandwich, let alone a painting. This is a criminal act. I demand you arrest him for disrupting a charity event. The auctioneer looked nervous. He turned to Leo. Sir,
These are serious accusations. In light of the high value of the bid, I am afraid I must ask for immediate verification of funds before we can proceed. It was a humiliation tactic. Usually verification happens privately after the event. Asking for it in the middle of the floor was an insult. Preston smiled viciously, thinking he had won. He crossed his arms, waiting for Leo to crumble and confess. Leo stood up. He buttoned his jacket slowly. He reached into his inner pocket. He didn't pull out a wallet. He pulled out the single black metal card I had given him. He walked toward the stage, the crowd parting for him. He approached the auctioneer's podium where a mobile card terminal sat. Preston laughed. Look at him. Probably a library card or a gym membership. Get him out of here. Leo didn't say a word. He held the card up so the light caught the titanium surface. The auctioneer's eyes widened. He recognized the centurion. He knew what it meant. Leo placed the card on the reader. The machine beeped. A single, long tone. The green light on the display flashed. Approved. The auctioneer looked at the screen and then looked at the audience. He cleared his throat and spoke into the microphone, his voice respectful and terrified. The bid is verified. The funds are secured. We have a bid of $500,000 from Mr. Thorne. Preston staggered back as if he had been shot. He looked at the card reader and then at Leo. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking gray and old. The guests started whispering frantically. Who is he? Did he say Thorne? Is that the hedge fund guy? Julian Vance jumped up from his table. He wasn't going to let this happen. His ego wouldn't allow it. He pulled out his phone, frantically dialing his father's private line. He needed authorization for more funds. He needed to crush Leo. 550,000, Julian shouted, holding the phone to his ear. Leo didn't even sit down. 600,000, he said calmly. Julian's face flushed. 700,000. Come on, Dad, pick up. 750, Leo countered. Julian was sweating now. He was screaming into his phone. Dad, authorize the transfer. I need liquidity. Now. Just do it. But I knew who was on the other end of that line. Or rather, who wasn't. Rebecca had done her job. The senator's accounts were frozen pending a federal audit. Julian was shouting into a void. I saw Julian's face fall. He lowered the phone slowly. He looked at Preston and shook his head. He was cut off. The bank of Daddy was closed. The auctioneer looked at Julian. Mr. Vance, do you wish to counter? Julian slumped into his chair, defeated. No bid. The room was electric. The underdog had just taken down the favorite. But the game wasn't over. I leaned forward and whispered to Leo loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, but intimate enough to be a command. Finish him. Don't just buy the painting. Buy the man. Leo nodded. He turned to the auctioneer. $1 million. The crowd gasped. $1 million for a painting worth maybe 50. It was an obscene amount of money. But Leo held up a hand, silencing the room. $1 million, Leo repeated. But I have a condition. The auctioneer looked at Preston, who was leaning against the easel, looking like he was about to faint. A condition, sir? Yes, Leo said, his voice ringing out clear and strong. I am buying this painting to help the Sterling family in their time of desperate need. Since Mr. Sterling was kind enough to personally escort me out of his home yesterday, I think it is only fair that he personally delivers this painting to me. Right now. Leo pointed to the floor in front of our table. I want Preston Sterling to carry that painting down here and hand it to me. If he wants the $1 million, he has to work for it. The room went dead silent. This was not business. This was a public execution. Preston looked at the painting. He looked at the $1 million figure on the screen. He knew that money was the only thing standing between him and total ruin. If he walked away, he lost everything. If he carried the painting, he lost his dignity. But dignity doesn't pay the mortgage. I watched Preston's internal struggle. I saw the exact moment his pride broke. His shoulders slumped. He looked at the audience, seeing the pity in their eyes. Slowly, painfully, Preston reached out and took the painting off the easel. It was heavy. He grunted under the weight. He stepped down the stairs, his knees shaking. He walked through the silent crowd, carrying the symbol of his ancestors like a servant. He walked toward the table where the man he called unworthy was standing. Leo stood tall, waiting. Preston reached our table. He was breathing hard, sweat dripping down his nose. He held the painting out to Leo. He couldn't meet his eyes. "Here," Preston whispered. "Take it." Leo didn't take it immediately. He let Preston hold it for a few seconds longer, letting the weight burn into his arms. "Thank you, Preston," Leo said, finally taking the frame. "You can go now." Preston turned and walked away, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the silence. Leo handed the painting to a waiter without even looking at it. "Put this in the trash," he said. "It doesn't match my decor." He sat down and straightened his napkin. The room erupted into chaos, but I didn't hear it. I was just looking at my son. The transformation was complete. The sheep had become the lion, and the jungle was finally his. The silence in the ballroom was heavy enough to crush a man, and Preston Sterling was buckling under the weight. He stood in front of our table, his hands trembling as he held out the heavy gold frame. The portrait of his great-grandfather, the man who built the Sterling Empire, stared out with stern, judgmental eyes. Preston tried to compose himself. He tried to salvage a shred of dignity from the wreckage of his pride. He cleared his throat and spoke into his lapel microphone, his voice straining to sound gracious. "Thank you," he stammered, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace of pain. "We appreciate this generous contribution from my former son-in-law. It is good to see that, despite our differences, you still respect the legacy of this family." He thrust the painting toward Leo, eager to be rid of the burden. Leo stood up slowly. He didn't snatch the painting. He took it with a calm, deliberate grip, holding it by the sides. The audience leaned forward, expecting a handshake or a reconciliation. They expected the prodigal son to return to the fold, bought and paid for by $1 million check. Leo looked at the painting. He looked at the stern face of the founder. Then he looked at Preston. "I do not respect your legacy, Preston," Leo said, his voice amplified by the microphone on the table. "Because your legacy is a lie. You built this family on the idea that you are better than everyone else. You told me my blood wasn't worthy. You told me I was just a visitor in your world." Leo paused, letting the words sink in. "I did not pay $1 million for this painting because I want to hang it on my wall," Leo continued. "I paid $1 million to show you that your history, your pride, and your name are just commodities, and I can buy them whenever I want." Preston blinked, confused. "Well, the painting is yours. Do what you want with it. Just give me the check." Leo smiled. It was a sad, final smile. "I am not buying art," Leo said, softy. "I am buying my freedom." Then, with a sudden, violent motion, Leo drove his knee upward. He brought the painting down hard over his knee. The sound of century-old canvas tearing was like a gunshot in the quiet room. The wood frame snapped with a dry, loud crack. The crowd gasped. A woman in the front row screamed. Leo didn't stop. He ripped the canvas in half, destroying the face of the Sterling patriarch. He tore it again and again, reducing the symbol of the Sterling bloodline to tatters. He threw the splintered wood and shredded canvas onto the floor at Preston's feet. "There is your legacy," Leo said, dusting off his hands. "It is trash. Just like the way you treated my son." Preston stared at the pile of debris on the floor. His face turned a deep, violent shade of purple. The veins in his neck bulged. He forgot the cameras. He forgot the investors. He forgot everything except the blind rage of a narcissist who had just been exposed. "You animal!" Preston screamed, lunging toward Leo. "You ungrateful gutter rat! I will kill you. I will ruin you." "Security! Arrest him! He destroyed private property!" Preston raised a fist ready to strike my son. That was my cue. I didn't shout. I didn't run. I simply stepped out from behind the table and walked into the spotlight. "Sit down, Preston." My voice wasn't loud, but it carried a resonance that froze him in his tracks. It was the voice I used when I walked into a boardroom to fire a CEO. It was the voice of absolute, final authority. Preston stopped, his fist hovering in the air. He looked at me, bewildered. "Who are you to tell me what to do, old man? You are nothing. You are a fisherman. Get out of my way before I have you thrown out with him." I walked up the stairs to the stage. The light hit me, and I didn't blink. I looked out into the darkness toward the sound booth at the back of the room. "Rebecca," I said calmly, "turn off the lights and show Mr. Sterling the news." The ballroom plunged into darkness. The chandeliers dimmed. The only light came from the massive projection screen behind the stage. A moment later, a logo appeared. It was a golden lion holding a key. The logo of Thorne Capital. A murmur went through the crowd. Everyone in the room knew that logo. It was the symbol of one of the most aggressive and successful venture capital firms in the country. Preston looked at the screen, confused. "What is this? Why is the Thorne logo on my screen?" Then the slide changed. It was a legal document. A high-resolution scan of a contract signed that very morning. The text was large enough for everyone to read. Assignment of debt. Debtor Sterling Technology Solutions and Preston Sterling. Primary creditor Thorne Capital. Amount outstanding $42 million. Status: default. Preston read the words. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He read them again. He looked at the signature line at the bottom of the contract. Authorized signature, Harrison Thorne, Chairman. He turned slowly to look at me. He looked at my face. He looked at the tuxedo that fit me perfectly. He looked at the way I stood, not like a retired fisherman, but like a titan of industry. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His knees actually buckled, and he had to grab the podium to stay upright. "You," Preston whispered, his voice trembling with horror. "You are Thorne." I stepped closer to him. The microphone caught every breath. "I am Harrison Thorne," I said, And for the last 10 years, I have been content to be just a father and a grandfather. I left this world behind because I found more value in a quiet life. But you dragged me back, Preston. I pointed to the screen where the evidence of his failure was glowing in high definition. You told my son that his bloodline was unworthy. You told him he came from nothing. You were so blinded by your own arrogance that you didn't even bother to check who you were declaring war on. I turned to the audience, addressing the hundreds of stunned faces. Mr. Sterling calls himself a business leader, but the truth is, Sterling Tech has been insolvent for 2 years. He has been funding his lifestyle by laundering company assets and putting his family in debt. He fired my son not because of performance, but because he needed a scapegoat for his own crimes. I turned back to Preston. You said you wanted a noble bloodline, Preston. Well, here is the truth about bloodlines. My bloodline does not use children as collateral. My bloodline does not sell daughters to cover bad loans. And my bloodline certainly does not kick a 6-year-old boy out on the street. We use our money to build things, I said, my voice rising. And occasionally, we use it to teach a lesson to people who have forgotten what honor means. Preston looked around frantically, looking for an ally, looking for a way out, but there was none. Brittany was sobbing at her table, her face buried in her hands. Julian Vance had disappeared, slipping out the back door the moment the logo appeared. The guests were staring at Preston with a mixture of disgust and fascination. But the deadline, Preston stammered, sweat pouring down his face. The bank said I had until noon tomorrow. I still have time. I can raise the money. I can fix this. I shook my head slowly. Read the fine print, Preston. I gestured to the screen again. Rebecca zoomed in on Clause 14. Immediate acceleration clause. In the event of confirmed financial malfeasance or reputational damage, the creditor reserves the right to demand full repayment immediately. I looked at him cold and unforgiving. Your stunt at the bank this morning, the audit we triggered on your accounts, that is reputational damage. And the money laundering investigation that the FBI is opening as we speak, that is financial malfeasance. I checked my watch. It was a Patek Philippe I had worn for the first time in a decade. It is 9 o'clock, I said. I am activating the clause. Preston shook his head, backing away. No, you can't. This is my company. My father built this. I walked toward him, closing the distance until I was inches from his face. It was your company. As of 1 minute ago, I have executed a foreclosure on all secure assets. That includes the factory, the patents, and this building. I leaned in close so only he and the microphone could hear. And it includes your house, Preston. The one you kicked my son out of. You are trespassing on my property. Preston looked at me with the eyes of a trapped animal. He looked at Leo, who was standing quietly by the ruined painting, watching the man who had tormented him crumble into dust. You are fired, Preston, I said. Get out of my building. The room erupted. Not with applause, but with the chaotic noise of a society scandal breaking in real time. Reporters were shouting questions. Flashes were going off like fireworks. Preston Sterling, the man who thought he was a king, stood alone on the stage, stripped of his crown, his castle, and his dignity. He looked at me one last time, hoping for mercy. But he found none. He looked at Leo, hoping for pity, but Leo just turned his back. Preston slumped his shoulders. He turned and walked off the stage, not with the stride of a CEO, but with the shuffle of a broken old man. He walked past the table where his daughter was crying and didn't even stop. He walked out of the ballroom and into the night, leaving behind a legacy of ash. I watched him go. Then I looked at Leo. He walked over to me, and for the first time in years, he hugged me. It wasn't a hug of desperation. It was a hug of gratitude. "Let's go home, Dad," Leo whispered. We walked out together, the crowd parting for us like the Red Sea. We didn't stop for interviews. We didn't stop to gloat. We had done what we came to do. We had rewritten the definition of worth. And as we stepped out into the cool night air, I knew that the real victory wasn't the $42 million I had just spent. It was seeing my son hold his head high again. The war was over, but the rebuilding was just beginning. The chaos that erupted in the ballroom was not the kind you see in movies, with screaming and running. It was the cold, efficient chaos of justice finally arriving. The heavy double doors at the back of the room swung open, and 6 men in windbreakers emblazoned with federal insignias marched in. I had timed this perfectly. My call to the Economic Crimes Division earlier that day had provided them with the digital paper trail of the offshore accounts and the fraudulent loans. They didn't need a warrant to enter a public space, but they certainly had one to put handcuffs on Preston Sterling. Preston saw them coming. For a moment, he looked like he might try to run, but there was nowhere to go. He was trapped on the stage he had built for his own glory. 2 agents stepped up and spun him around. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut echoed through the stunned silence of the room. It was a metallic finality that signaled the end of an era. Preston started shouting about his lawyers, about his rights, about how this was all a misunderstanding, but nobody was listening. The guests were too busy filming with their phones, documenting the fall of a titan. I looked over at the table where Brittany and Julian were sitting. Julian Vance saw the agents, and his survival instinct kicked in immediately. He didn't look at his fiancée. He didn't try to help his future father-in-law. He simply stood up, keeping his head down, and slipped toward the service exit. He moved like a rat, fleeing a sinking ship, abandoning the woman he had promised to marry 5 minutes ago. I watched him go, knowing he wouldn't get far. His frozen accounts would lead the authorities right to his door by morning. Brittany was left alone. She watched her father being dragged off the stage and her lover disappearing into the kitchen. The reality of her situation crashed down on her. The money was gone. The status was gone. The protection was gone. She looked around the room frantically, her eyes landing on the only person who had ever truly loved her. Leo. She stood up and ran toward him. Her heels clicked on the marble floor, the sound desperate and uneven. She didn't look like the Ice Queen anymore. She looked like a frightened child. She threw herself at Leo's feet, grabbing his hand with both of hers. Her tears were flowing freely now, smearing her mascara down her cheeks. "Leo, please," she sobbed, her voice high and thin. "You have to help me. You know I didn't want this. I was forced, Leo. Daddy made me do it. He said he would disown me if I didn't leave you. I never stopped loving you. You know that, right?" The room watched in fascination. The woman who had worn a diamond ring from another man an hour ago was now begging her ex-husband for salvation. She clung to his expensive suit jacket as if it were a life raft. "I was scared, Leo," she cried. "I didn't know what to do." "But we can fix this. We can start over. Just tell them to stop. Tell your dad to stop. We are family." I watched my son. This was the moment that would define the rest of his life. It is easy to be strong when you are fighting an enemy. It is much harder to be strong when the enemy is on their knees, weeping and wearing the face of the person you used to adore. Leo looked down at her. He didn't pull his hand away immediately. He looked at her crying face, and for a second I saw the memory of the woman he married flicker in his eyes. But then he looked at the ring on her finger. The massive diamond Julian had given her. She hadn't even taken it off. Leo gently pulled his hand from her grip. The movement was slow, deliberate, and absolutely devastating. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, the silk square I had tucked in there for him. He didn't use it to wipe her tears. He handed it to her. "Stand up, Brittany," Leo said softly. She stood up, shaking, sniffing into the handkerchief, hoping for a reconciliation. Leo looked at her, and there was no anger in his voice. There was no hatred. There was only a profound and distant pity. It was the way you look at a stranger who has lost their way. "You weren't forced, Brittany," Leo said. "You made a trade. You traded a husband who loved you for a lifestyle you thought you deserved. You bet on the money." Brittany shook her head frantically, reaching for him again. "No, Leo, it isn't like that." "It is exactly like that," Leo interrupted, his voice firm. "You loved the Sterling name. You loved the credit cards. You loved the house. And you thought I was the weak link that threatened all of that." He took a half step back, putting distance between them. "The problem isn't that you left me, Brittany. The problem is that you think you can come back just because the money changed hands. You didn't love me when I was poor, and you don't get to love me now that I am powerful." Brittany froze. The realization hit her. The bridge wasn't just burned, it was demolished. Leo looked past her toward the exit. "The Sterling money is gone, Brittany. And so are you." He didn't say goodbye. He simply turned around and walked away. He walked past the agents who were reading Preston his rights. He walked past the guests who were staring at him with newfound respect. He walked toward the double doors, his stride long and confident. Brittany collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, screaming his name. But Leo didn't flinch. He didn't look back. He kept walking until he disappeared into the night, leaving the wreckage of his past behind him on that ballroom floor. 1 week later, the sun was shining on the glass facade of the building formerly known as Sterling Tech. Construction crews were already busy removing the old silver letters from the sign. In their place, a new logo was being installed. A simple, modern design that read, "Thorne Innovations." Inside, the atmosphere had transformed. The fear that Preston had instilled in the employees was gone, replaced by a nervous energy. Leo sat in the corner office. The mahogany desk was the same, but the man sitting behind it was different. He had spent the last 7 days auditing the entire company. He had fired the sycophants, the nepotism hires, and the corrupt managers who had helped Preston cook the books. But he had kept the engineers, the support staff, the people who actually did the work. He was currently on a video call with the factory floor, reassuring the workers that their pensions were safe and that operations would continue. He spoke with authority, but also with kindness. He wasn't ruling with fear, he was leading with integrity. I stood in the doorway watching him. He was wearing a simple button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up, working hard. He looked happy. Not the frantic happiness of someone trying to please a tyrant, but the deep, grounded satisfaction of a man building something of his own. He looked up and saw me. He smiled and waved me in. Dad, Leo said, ending the call. The board just approved the restructuring plan. We are going to be in the black by next quarter. And I hired that security guard back, the one Preston fired for letting us in. I made him head of site security. I nodded, sitting down on the leather couch. You are doing good work, Leo. Better than I ever did. Leo laughed. I had a good teacher. Are you sure you don't want an office, Dad? The chairman's suite is open. I shook my head. No, son. My work here is done. The company needs a CEO who understands code and the future. I understand leverage and the past. This is your world now. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city. I felt a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in years. The secret was out. The burden was lifted. My son was safe.
Where will you go? Leo asked, standing up to walk me to the door. I smiled, thinking of the cool mist on the water at dawn. The bass are biting at the lake, Leo, and that old truck of mine needs a new alternator. I think it is time I got back to being a retired fisherman. Leo hugged me. It was a tight, fierce hug. Thank you, Dad, for everything. I patted his back. Just promise me one thing, Leo. Anything. Don't let this suit change you. Wear the power. Don't let the power wear you. I walked out of the office and down the elevator. I walked out of the building and climbed into my rusted Ford F-150. It coughed to life with a cloud of black smoke, drawing dirty looks from the people in their Teslas. I didn't care. I rolled down the window and let the wind hit my face as I drove toward the highway. I thought about Preston, sitting in a holding cell, waiting for a bail hearing that would never come. I thought about Brittany, trying to find a job with no skills and a ruined reputation. And I thought about Leo, building a future for Toby. Life has a funny way of balancing the scales. Sometimes it takes a long time, and sometimes it happens all at once in a glorious explosion of karma. So remember this the next time you see an old man in a dirty vest driving a beat-up truck. Don't judge a book by its worn-out cover. You never know who is sitting behind the wheel. And more importantly, never underestimate the length a father will go to protect his child. If you mess with the cub, you better be ready to face the lion. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed watching a fake billionaire get what he deserved, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me share more stories like this. And I want to know from you in the comments, have you ever had to start over from nothing like Leo did? How did you find the strength to keep going? Let's talk about it. Until next time, take care of your family and never forget your worth.